we lived through a period of 0% interest rates, which means cheap capital available, and kind of a pandemic-fueled increase in growth in D2C. Now, in a high interest rate environment, it's become much more of an existential question, which is, can you afford the rate that you're being charged for this, given that sales are not growing at the rate they used to be and the money's got more expensive? So those two things coming together means that you have to be more thoughtful about what is the cost of capital, who am I taking it from, and what do I really need it for? And so that's where we believe you have to set up more of a strategy of what am I doing and why. It's a tough landscape out there. And so I think that being thoughtful about those things is more important than ever.
Hello and welcome to D2C Podcast. I'm Dyck. Today we're covering some fancy financial footwork with Sabah's Mickey Ashmore and Highbeam's Samir Shergill. Mickey started Sabah with a simple goal: bring the timeless handmade craftsmanship of small-town Turkey to quality shoe lovers everywhere, one pair at a time. Now, this podcast dives deep on Mickey's journey from his beginnings as a finance bro to selling out his first pop-up in Brooklyn to bootstrapping to a multi-eight-figure business, all with a little help from his friend Samir at Highbeam. Highbeam is banking built to help e-commerce people, and this chat really nails some of the critical financial aspects of growth that we just don't talk about on this pod enough. Early in the podcast, Mickey nails the reason he got into this business in the first place: independence to do what he wants and grow his business how he wants to. And this podcast, you'll learn how having a firm grip on the banking side of your business can be a huge unlock. I really enjoyed this one, and I hope it helps you reframe your thinking on how helpful having a good banker in your corner can be. On with the show. Mickey, Samir, thank you guys so much for coming on the D2C podcast. Mickey, I'm a huge fan of Sabah footwear. Can you give me the why as to why you built Sabah?
I built Sabah. I wanted to express myself and I wanted to live independently. My main motivation was independence. I wanted to do my own thing and put my expression out to the world.
And then how did you come across this amazing, unique product?
Basically the origin of the brand was out of college, I lived in Istanbul. I worked for Microsoft there as an expat. And a couple of years into living there, I was gifted a pair of traditional Turkish slippers, which are the inspiration for Sabah's. They're hand stitched in a certain way and using local Turkish leather and a buffalo sole, and which is a leather not found in shoes commonly anymore. And I got this pair of shoes and loved them. A year later, having moved back to New York and wearing them around the city, I had destroyed the shoes and also just loved them, and I wanted another pair. So I got in touch with the man that had made them. His name was Orhan, and his family's been making shoes for 150 years, since the mid-1800s, and asked him to make me a fresh pair, but with a few changes. And that was really the beginning of Sabah. It wasn't intended as a business. It was just for me personally. But that pair led to more pairs and led to pairs for friends. And then I was like, you know what? I think we could build a business out of this. And here we are 10 years later, still making 90% of our footwear with Orhan and his family, by the way.
That's unreal. And how did you sell them? Where did you initially find the demand for the shoe, besides you knowing they're awesome?
Word of mouth. I received my first shipment of Sabah's in June of 2013. And within a week, I hosted a party at my house. I had this little house that had a door on the street. And I invited literally everyone I'd ever met that lived in New York and said, come over. I'd always liked to host. So I said, I'm hosting a party. And by the way, I'm going to be selling these shoes on the side. And I think that day I sold 40 pairs. So I was like, this is cool. This is fun. And it was a blast. And I loved telling the story of the shoes. And I'd lived in Turkey for a while before that. I spoke Turkish. I felt really connected to the culture and the place. And so it was exciting also to you asked at the very beginning about my inspiration. Part of it was also I wanted to do business globally. I loved the idea of this global commerce, and so it was just something fun at first.
You mentioned something that doesn't get mentioned enough, I think, on the podcast in terms of your motivation as to why you're working as hard as you have. Like all of our listeners who are building D2C brands are. You said about making yourself independent, but giving yourself freedom to live how you want. I'm curious, how has that affected the way you've thought about growing this business over the last 8 years or so?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I'd say that from the beginning, I've really followed my intuition and I've I've never had necessarily. I mean, now we have goals and things, but my goals were always really to hold true to values. And I thought about my business in a very long-term sense. I'd come from a background in a bit of investing and finance, and so I also decided I didn't want to raise money because I wanted to build something for myself and something that I could really control and where I could have my, really express myself through my business and make decisions that I thought were best. Um, and that's been a big part of our brand is keeping it independent, and growing slowly. And I always said, I have my very first business plan I ever wrote, and it wrote, one of the things I said was my goal is to just build a strong recurring customer base that shops with us year after year. It wasn't about, I was focusing, the term is retention. Like I was focused on building loyal customers, not just acquiring new, I think that's a big part of like independence and living that through.
And again, and it's a choice of product market fit as well, right? You're literally selling a product that people have been wearing for shortly after humans started like domesticating animals or something, right? Like it's 1,000-year-old kind of product in some ways. And so building for the long term is obviously a good fit.
Right. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it's interesting. These shoes, when I started Sabah 10 years ago, no one in Turkey was wearing the traditional shoes anymore, like commonly. It was really like a bit of a relic of the past, something sold to tourists, maybe something worn at home. The place we make our shoes is near the Syrian border, far southeast of Turkey. So it's really quite a far cry from Istanbul and the Turkey a lot of people know. So it wasn't something that had been worn. So, part of what's been beautiful about building Sabah is kind of reviving this craft, bringing new light to it, elevating and amplifying it, and then getting to like, we've gone from being three or four craftspeople in Turkey to now almost 50. And we're a mix of Turkish and Syrian craftspeople. We've also opened a small factory in El Paso, Texas, where we're working with boot makers to make shoes. And so it's really been partly and unintentionally craft revival, at the same time.
Are the shoes leather soled or rubber soled?
The traditional shoe has a buffalo leather sole. Our shoe still has that, but on top of it, we put a rubber outsole that can be replaced. So part of the idea of a Saba is you get a pair, they form to your feet, they age beautifully, they get better and better looking with wear, and then they can be resold. We have our own resoling service we opened a few years ago, or started a few years ago, where you can send them in and for $50, they're like resold, cleaned, conditioned, recolored if they need to be, we can fix and so allow them to really live on. So we have customers. I mean, my very first customer, one of them, his name is Jonas Barre, and he loves to text me every year his polished Sabas from 10 years ago.
Amazing. They become heirlooms. I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
it. I'm
yeah, no,
grabbing a pair
I
after
mean,
this call.
and of course, I think one of the things that's about a product that's well made and that lasts, it also does require care. Like, you buy a really nice car to make it last and drive well for 20 years. You got to maintain it. And so Sabas, they don't have to maintain. You can wear the heck out of them for 4 or 5 years and they're going to be just fine. But if you do it with a little maintenance, it can go a long way. So that's the resoling and conditioning part.
So let's bring Samir into the conversation here. How did you meet Samir? And like, yeah, how did your initial relationship sort of begin?
Samir and I were introduced by a mutual friend, a guy named Adonis, who's a Greek guy that Samir had worked with prior. And, Adonis has also been around my business since the beginning of when it started and understood like the values with which I was building it, that I was independently owned, that I was, of course, wanting to grow my business, but I had maybe some other values that were equally as important. And when he heard about what Samir was building, I think he thought, oh, this is a good union of brains. Like this is a person, Samir, that's trying to build something that very much will speak to Mickey and what he's built and trying to do. And I think Adonis was a friend, one of my business buddies, he's a friend and someone I talk about business with a lot. So I would also have been kind of bemoaning certain aspects of my business and, finance and cash flow and just like trying to, bootstrapping something's hard. And I think he thought, oh, well, my buddy Samir is trying to, trying to help solve that actually, or, has an idea around it. So we got connected really just to ideate and talk.
It's like
And,
the no, no, no. It's and part of what when I was meeting Mickey and what I love is the energy, and you can tell, it's almost like all these brand founders, like when they talk about their customers or their product, and their eyes light up, and you can see the energy, and then you see Mickey like, and I had like these finance issues. There's like this kind of like down here, and it's understandable because Mickey built this amazing business from a place of authenticity, and he's passionate about his customers and his product, and the reality is though, and what we found was that the financial foundation is actually essential to this business because in order to scale sustainably, you do have to manage your cash flow. You do have to make smart decisions. You have to do these things, which in some ways is not the core motivation for why you started the business. So our mission at Highbeam was a lot around, can we kind of work with, empower the Mickeys of the world to say, like, let us partner with you to help really build sustainable long-term businesses to help you bring this to life. And we just felt that there was this huge gap where there were no real partners from the standpoint of that were operating in their best interest to help them grow and scale and make these visions come to life. And that was why we were fortunate enough to meet Mickey when we were relatively early on. This is 2021. And so we were like, Mickey was kind enough to trust us when we were still building a lot of the tools. And he was really been a partner to help us say, how can we build things that will actually help you scale this business? And that's why we've been kind of fortunate to grow and build Highbeam in concert with Sabah and other brands together.
Samir, can you walk me through, and you can chime in on this with your personal experience about it after Mickey, but explain to me a little bit. I've never taken funds myself. We've bootstrapped D2C so far. Explain to me a little bit about the landscape of what banking for D2C businesses was like previously to you guys, and then what you're looking to innovate specifically.
No, thanks. It's a great question. So I think that most brand founders, they have to kind of cobble together their finance stack from like a legacy bank like a JP Morgan or a Bank of America, an accounting firm that sends them a balance sheet or a profit and loss statement, and they have this like random spreadsheet, and they're trying to put together really core questions that are fundamental to running the business, like how much can I afford to spend on inventory? How much can I afford to spend on marketing? Can I afford to hire 2 more people? Like these are existential questions for the business that we believe your bank should help you answer and solve. So by focusing squarely on online brands and omnichannel brands, we're trying to answer those questions and say things like, how can we as your banking partner build tools or relationship to help you manage your cash flow and really operate in your best interest? So what does that mean? It means things like, rather than taking, a one-time cash advance, which is a very popular product in e-commerce, where the lender sends you $100 and you pay back $105, let's build a plan for the capital you need, and let's really set you up with a line of credit so that you can actually only use the money when you need it. Let's do things like, set up a 4% interest account so that you actually make money when you do get it comes in the door. And these are things that you're busy, you don't think of, but how do we make it all in one kind of product that's really designed for your needs? And that was the essence of what we've tried to build. And that's kind of what for us, success is that people like Mickey kind of trust us with helping run and manage his business. And in some ways, that was the essence of what banking used to be, right? Like you had trust and faith in the relationship with your banker, and you actually
personal relationship
grow and build
in a lot of cases. Yeah,
that's right. And so that I feel like that's gone away, and we're trying to bring that back to life through kind of things that we built.
Which really appealed to me because my whole thing is about relationships, and I think of Sabah as like an old world brand. We didn't have a website for the first 3 years. You had to buy your shoes in person. We've been built on relationships, and so to me, like being able to text, call, email, consult my banker, meet him for lunch, get to like work with the bank in that way was so appealing on a personal level and on a service level, which moves me a lot, especially when you have all the relationships I have with my banks before were like gatekeeper and or just very impersonal. And so it's I think finance, I have a finance background, so I think, all things considered, we've done a pretty good job with our business financially, but even then it's extremely intimidating and there's a lot of uncertainty and that's scary. So having a banker to call or, a financial partner to call and say, can we talk this through? And can even just gives you peace of mind. It's so powerful.
How, like in terms of in funding, right now, the landscape has probably shifted quite a bit in the last couple of years. Like when you've got a lot of brands that are, or a lot of the lending brands offering cash up front for payment, kind of due to the nature of D2C, like almost right away, because you've got sales coming in, you're starting to pay back. My question is like, has the landscape shifted enough that brands really need to be need to start becoming smarter about how and when they take money?
Yeah, It's a great question, and I'll give you my point of view, and Mickey can kind of give you the practitioner's answer as well. I think that we lived through a period of 0% interest rates, which means cheap capital available, and kind of a pandemic fueled increase in growth in D2C. And so, in some ways, you didn't have to worry about it because you could take the cash at whatever price it was and convert it into sales, and you would still, the model would work. It was inefficient. Maybe you're spending a little bit more than you thought, but it still worked. I think now in a high interest rate environment, it's become much more of an existential question, which is, can you afford the rate that you're being charged for this, given that sales are not growing at the rate they used to be and the money's got more expensive? And so what that means is, that cash advance that was a 20% APR, which is like the overall interest rate that you would pay on it, now it's a 40% APR. And a lot of times the return you're getting on that capital isn't what it used to be. So the kind of those two things coming together means that we try to tell brands, be very careful about why you're taking the cash, and be sure that you can actually pay this back and not just get on a debt treadmill where you're just kicking the can down the road, and 3 months later you're going to have to take another bigger loan, and all of your profits that have to go into growing the business are now going to debt providers. And so before, the pie was large enough that you could get away with it, and even if 50% of the money was going to debt, you're like, I can still grow the business. That's just no longer true. And so I think you have to be more thoughtful about, what is the cost of capital? Who am I taking it from? And what do I really need it for? And so that's where we believe you have to set up more of a strategy of what am I doing and why. And I think there's been the kind of the people that were lending for these cash advance like products, they've in many cases have ratcheted up the rates or kind of pulled the rug out from under brands in terms of you used to have $100,000 offer, now you have a $50,000 offer or whatever it might be. So it's a tough landscape out there. And so I think that being thoughtful about those things is more important than ever. And the last thing I'll say is traditionally, most banks would not lend to online brands. Didn't understand them. They're not kind of quick enough. You go to Bank of America and you ask for a loan, it just doesn't work. So there were all these specialty e-commerce lenders that had a cash advance product that was simple on the surface, but behind the scenes actually ended up being quite expensive. So I feel like those lenders still exist, but they're not always operating in the best interest of the long-term success of the brand. And that's really what we've seen as the change in the last couple of years.
They're still operating in their model, right? They're still operating in the model that was popularized during the boom. And so they haven't maybe notified all their potential clients that the model isn't quite as effective as it was at these interest rates, right?
Yeah, well, they don't want you to know that. It's pretty hidden.
Yeah.
Right?
And so from the brand's perspective, it's just I'm getting a little bit less money and it seems like the fee's gone up a little bit, but I guess that's still right. And, it's just on the margin. They're smart enough to always have and make their return. The person that's going to get squeezed is the brand, not the debt provider. They will do fine. They'll figure out their underwriting models, but go ahead, Mickey.
I was going to say, and you have to think about it I have a few comments. One, from the perspective of the brand owner, the entrepreneur, you're usually going to these people because you're desperate, right? You're like, I have generally, right? Or you have some big plans and you want to fund it. But if you have time and plans, then there's a lot of smarter ways to fund a business. But generally you're like, hey, I got 6 weeks of cash left. I'm going into my low season. I got to build for, I got to pay payroll, and what's the quickest way to bring $450,000 into my business? Well, it's these things, and it's expensive. But money now and secure, giving you that next, you kind of hope you're going to get off the treadmill. I'm just going to patch this now and believe in the future, which we all, any entrepreneur is super optimistic, but then you get stuck on the treadmill that Samir talks about. So I think that those providers, I don't think that they're trying to do good in some ways, but I think it's just it's like they're evil, but I think it's anybody who looks at it realizes it's not the best way to fund a business. And they're taking advantage of the situation of people running out of money and needing money quick. The second thing I'll say about the landscape is I think a lot of people understood growth at all costs isn't that interesting anymore. And profitability is, on a business level, first of all, a bunch of companies grew at all costs, were never profitable. IPO'd, tried to sell, et cetera, and had kind of average outcomes, despite seeming to be very successful companies that we all admired. There's that case. There's also the fact of I raised a bunch of money and I'm stressed to the max because I'm trying to grow it really fast and fund a thing that's not making money. And that's not very fun at some level. I don't know,
At these
what
other
is your
people's
mission?
expectations, so you lose your that
Right.
feeling of independence as
Yeah.
well.
And that's not necessarily wrong. I mean, that's a game, right? Or that's like an approach. And hey, if you want to play that game, play it. But I think more people are now interested in hey, what's the game of I set out to build a beautiful business. I set out to service customers. I set out to express myself. I set out to build something healthy on the inside. And that doesn't, maybe that means next year I grow 12% or 14% or 0%, but I'm profitable and I'm sane and I'm a great boss and we have an awesome internal culture because we're not jamming people to work 18 hours a day, whatever. And that shift kind of also pairs very well with what Samir is doing because he's offering the friendly, responsible, transparent, kind, business
Yep.
friendly version of
Aligned,
this.
truly aligned, right? Which
Align,
is
and
the
it's
way new business models thrive when you find true
yeah, and
alignment.
one thing I've been thinking about is and this is we don't have to go for the same, but is there really anything in your life that you want to be huge? As the is the pure goal of it? I can't think of anything. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, but I can't think of a lot of things, and you just want to be bigger. You want it to be better. You want it to be more fun. You want it to be more meaningful. You want it to be more beautiful. But it's not really always about scale anymore. And I think there's also a shift. It's is scale the always have to be the default goal? So, is success scale only? No, it can be a lot of things. So I think
Yeah.
Samir's business can help you scale. If scale's your goal, it can help you scale for sure. If your goal is profitability, it can help you be profitable and help you do both. And that's really cool and been the case for me.
Can you give me an example, Mickey, of a way that that Highbeam has that part of their service specifically has unlocked either a kind of growth or a new mindset or more profitability for you?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest one is when I first met Samir, I was considering different ways of funding. My business every spring, every winter, kind of goes into a low period before the spring, and we're producing a lot. We're generally pretty tight on cash, and it's nice to get a little infusion. And I've done different things. Sometimes I'm able to get through it by bare knuckling. Sometimes we're able to get through it without bare knuckling, and often it's I need some kind of help to get from January to May. And so Samir helped me analyze all my options and really understand the cost of capital. And actually, Highbeam extended a line of credit to me that was the cheapest, the easiest to work with, and sits right within my bank. So really effective. And again, doesn't have to be paid back. All the other ones, if I took the line of credit on Jan 15 or the cash advance on Jan 15, I started paying it on Jan 16. Well, the Highbeams offer get the money on Jan 15 and you kind of pay it back when you need to, when you can. And of course there's interest and things on it, but it's just more classic. And that's a great example, and helping me understand that and not pushing it on me, by the way. It's hey, here's your menu of options and here's how we're great. Here's some other ones could make sense. And it's often a combination of things.
In I was going to say, I was just talking with a friend of mine at Bushbaum, and he was talking about taking a loan from the Canadian Business Development Bank. And as a Canadian, Samir, I'm wondering if because it sounds like that's actually a pretty pretty decent option when you have the time. It's as a Canadian, did working in a country where we've got products like that inform how you've built Highbeam?
It has, and it's actually a great point because we believe that we want our brands to get the cheapest form of capital for their needs in that moment. So we recommend actually and work with all of our brands to can you get a small business loan because that's the cheapest capital you can get. So go apply for that and get the 5%, 7% term loan, and we'll fit that into the credit stack because there's a huge place for that. That is the cheapest money you're going to get. Go get that. And
Yeah.
that's where we want to build really a strategy. So kind of what Mickey was talking about, our approach really is rather than here's $100, give us 110 back. Let's build a plan for why you need the money, where you can get it, what timing needs to be. If you're taking money, for example, to open a new store, that's not going to pay back in 3 months. You probably need a different source of funding for that than you need I need a marketing advance, but it's going to be paying back in 60 days. So it's a little bit of a more involved process. We're not transactional, but that's where we try to work to understand what are you trying to do and how do we line up the right sources of funding, even if it's not us, with that. And the reason we do that is because really at our core, we're a banking partnership and relationship. The funding is, a key feature of that, but that's really the hope in which we can build something where you can feel more in control. I think that a lot of times, a lot of the brands that we work with say they're really good at managing the top line and they kind of run on intuition on the bottom line in some ways. And so how do we kind of unpack that a little and help them get more comfortable and confident with the choices they're making? And I think that just to bring it back to what you were saying earlier, I think a lot of times when people are under the gun and you have a supplier payment you have to make and you have to take $100,000 from whoever's giving it to you, that's tough, but I understand why. But how do we make sure we don't get in that space the next time around?
Right.
Very cool. Amen. So what were we going to say there, Mickey?
No, nothing. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, what are the brands, like, obviously, Sabah, like, with your awesome background, your slow growth, all this awesome stuff. Who in our listener base are the people that will get the most value out of Highbeam? Would you say, Samir?
Now, it's two main. So, for anyone less than probably up to like $1 million of revenue, if you're still figuring out, do I have a product that someone wants to buy, and that's your core problem, then we're probably not necessarily the best match at that point. But the moment you hit maybe that $500,000 or $1 million of sales and now want to scale, at that point, we're probably a good match to say, let's build a plan together, especially for people who are bootstrap founders or have not taken venture money and are like themselves, it's their business. They own this business. It's their passion and joy. Like, how do we help those people who don't have access necessarily to a venture funded analyst from the VC firm or whatever it might be? Like, that's really what makes me kind of excited about working with. And so, Mickey obviously falls squarely in that. But that's sort of probably the profile of the brand operator, founder, owner that we work kind of most successfully with.
And then on the Sabah side there, Mickey, what are your goals? We talked a little bit about growth and thinking about it a little bit differently. How do you talk about your goals in 2023 with Sabah?
I think it's a good question. Let me think about it. There's a lot of different places I could go with this. I think for us, this year is around clarity and mastery. So we've grown a nice business. We've been in business for 10 years. It's a nice sized company now. And I think we've been growing and running and like playing a lot of catch up, and we weren't even growing intentionally. And just like we're doing good work and growth happens, we're like, okay, here we are. We got 6 stores. We have an online business. We have an office. We have 40 or something so odd employees. It's like, how do we, for the next 10 years, like have a really great foundation to grow off of or to just continue forward with? Whether this year we decided like our goal is not growth. If growth happens, great. But our goal is let's be profitable. We've been profitable. Let's like maximize those profits. Let's get really smart about how we want to run our business. Let's get really good insights into how we analyze the company. Let's, a big thing for us in the last year has been, let's be really healthy on the inside. Like last year we offered like the best benefits we could possibly offer to the company. We started really bringing in like structure around people that makes people are happy and growing and feeling awesome. And I think we'd already been doing that intuitively. Like we're a family business. So it's like, we're like, how do we formalize some of those programs? Right now we're talking with the IRC around, how we can hire from the refugee community that's in the United States and provide jobs. Like, how can we use this platform in a way that's enriching, not just in a financial sense, but like in like all of our lives? Like Sabah is all about people. Our company is incredibly diverse. And we all really love each other, not to say there's not occasionally conflicts and things, but like, it's like, how do we just continue to foster that? And like, it's a lot of responsibility. It's not about growth at this point as much.
Can you talk to me a little bit about your operations in Turkey and how that sort of expanded as you've grown?
Yeah. It's an interesting time, an interesting question, because we make our shoes in Gaziantep, Turkey. That's about 40 miles from the Syrian border in southeast Turkey. And it's the epicenter of this earthquake that just happened last Monday at 4 a.m. in Turkey time. And I'd left there 2 days before. So it's an incredibly difficult time there. And we've started the business. We were 4 or 5 folks in the workshop, and now we're close to 50 people and families. And then of course, a network of folks that support what we do. And, Gaziantep's the city I've spent the most time of my life outside of places I've lived. And it's truly like, the son of the owner of the workshop. I met him when he was 14 or 15. He's now 25. He's like, we call each other the brother. We neither of us have brothers, so we're like the brothers we never had, And so it's a really tight relationship. And I think I spent a lot of time in our production facility. I spent a lot of time eating and talking and sharing, going to the homes, and like it's really like a store. Craft by hand is really a human thing, and so we've really tried to bring humanity to it and share. And it's like, yeah, we make a great pair of shoes, but it's these great people behind it and this great culture behind it as well. And um, I don't remember what the initial question was, but
I think that's it. You just talked
yeah.
about it, and like the impact that you're having there, right? Like the impact that you're like, I think that's why we get into a lot of the businesses we have. Like for me, I love seeing people hire, love being able to pay people a great wage and having them earn it, and all of that. And I imagine, yeah, like growing out that business in Turkey, it's got to be pretty rewarding as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all goes with this long-term focus, right? Like making great shoes, doing anything with a long-term focus well requires great people behind it, whether that's how we run our stores, how we run our customer service, and how we make our products. And people need to feel positive, well taken care of, like they have opportunity ahead of them, like they have a meaningful place to work. And I think we've tried to do that in all these different, locations. And I think it's also important to realize it's mutual, right? Like my success is their success and their success is my success. And sure, we've provided a lot for our workshop in Turkey, but they provided just as much for me. It goes both ways. I mean, it's a partnership. And it's been a really beautiful one, and probably like, it's a pretty amazing, it's been I never would have imagined I'd be making shoes in Gaziantep, Turkey for the last 10 years. And I always I get there and I'm like, I can't believe I'm here, like doing this. It's
Eating a
crazy,
pomegranate
you
off the
know?
tree. I really want to go to Turkey. I'm gonna have to find my way there. I want to go to Göbekli Tepe. Have you heard of Göbekli Tepe? The huge.
Yes, it's very, very close to where we make our shoes, the architectural site, or actually archaeological site.
Yeah, nice. Well,
Yeah.
we'll go into crypto archaeology on the next podcast. Samir, any final words for people out there, in the boat of an early Mickey, looking at maybe storm clouds ahead and wondering maybe now is the time to kind of work more closely with their bank?
Yeah, I think that from what we've seen is, what's the analogy? Hiding your head in the sand is not the right analogy, but like I think there's light at the end of all this. Like I think for people that are building businesses that are their passion, their joy, they're selling things people want, like the impact they're having on the world. Like, there's a world in which Mickey was a Microsoft analyst instead of like doing what he's doing. And there's a genuine value in what he's building and driving towards. And I think that if you're in that boat and things seem a little bit like uncertain, maybe the sales are a little bit down or interest rates have gone up or cash might be tight. Like one is I think just try to get, a big picture view on what is possible, what are you doing, what are the tough decisions you have to make. Like, don't stick your head in the sand and hope for the best, because there is a good outcome possible here if you make the right decisions now. But my advice is like there probably are some decisions you have to make, and don't hide from them. Make those decisions. Like that might be you have to cut certain costs. You can't solve that problem with just taking on debt. So face those decisions. Kind of like make sure that you set up a structure in which you're comfortable and confident. You feel like you understand what's going on. So like you understand how much of my money's coming in, how much money's going out. Just like I think don't operate purely on intuition, because it's tough to do that over the next 3 to 6 months, especially in the kind of macroeconomic environment we are. That's usually my advice. And then, yeah, work with, a banking partner, a financial partner that you trust and that you can actually work with to get that advice. And that's usually what we recommend. And that's what we've been fortunate enough to do.
Very cool. So if you're in the audience and this sounds like you, go to highbeam.co. Also, could they just send you an email? What's your email, Samir?
Yeah, please. Samir, Samir at highbeam.co. I try to still work with every customer, talk to them directly. It's getting harder and harder as we scale, but please shoot me a line directly, and always happy to hear from your audience.
And if you want to wear updated legacy Turkish amazing shoes like I'm going to be in a couple weeks from the point at which I order them this afternoon, you go to Sabah. It's Sabah.am, right?
Yeah, Sabah.am. Sabah means the morning time, and AM PM. Sabah.com was taken.
I saw Sabah was the morning because they kind of originated as slippers, right?
Right. Amen.
Makes
I mean, I
perfect
picked
sense.
the word Sabah. I like the morning time, so it all
Yeah,
kind of made sense to me.
it's
So
a great
yeah.
name.
Yeah, so
Nice.
Sabah.am, yeah. And we have 6 stores, so we love seeing people in real life. That's where I think everything really comes alive. So, and I think if I can
For
offer
anyone,
anybody, if I can offer anybody a piece of advice, it would be definitely to, and I'm definitely to check out Highbeam, even if you think you don't need to, because I learned a lot and gained a lot from it that I didn't even imagine. And for a long time, I paid a lot of attention to our finances, but sort of like focused on selling my way through problems. And I think I'm understanding there's a lot of other ways to run a biz that can involve focusing on that bottom half and optimizing that are just really freeing. So really a worthwhile call and check in at the very least.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at direct-to-consumer, all one word, .co. I'm Eric Dyck, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.